afternoon and welcome yet again to the 47th Conference of the Caribbean Studies Association. I am Dr. Shinzira Davis Kahina. I serve as the president for the balance of the week before it's turned over. Hooray! It's been a very engaging year, and I'm very pleased to be able to share, and I encourage persons to look at, you're going to have a slide that has your name, right? Give thanks, because what I'd like to highlight is Obi Egbuna II. Persons like to say junior. My brothers help me to remember, don't do that. So I'm just learning Obi Egbuna II, and I encourage persons to just Google on Obi Egbuna Sr., and then you'll understand part of what's going to happen this afternoon. So we have with us a U.S. correspondent to the Herald in Zimbabwe, their national paper, a U.S.-based member of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association. And while his navel string is considered buried in London and England, his heartstring is grounded in the D.C., Maryland area in the 48 contiguous U.S. and many other spaces, because he spends a significant amount of time traveling and sharing information around his background in political science. He is a founding member of the Pan-African Liberation Organization, PALO, that was established in DC. And I want to highlight that he does a lot of work around student youth movements. He does a lot of organizing with young people, and most recently, he has been really working on Mass Emphasis, which is a youth-generated theater, education, cultural heritage, socio-political movement. I want to say it's more than an institution. It's an actual movement in addition to being an institution, where most recently several of his students have presented a work around Garvey, Cabral, Bishop, and others in terms of radicalism. And these children presented their work in 14 languages. 14 languages. And I think that that is commendable, and I want to give him a round of applause for that. The other part that I want to highlight is that, and this is available here as well, is this book called Destroy This Temple, The Voice of Black Power in Britain, that was first published in 1971 by his father, Obi Egbuna. And I think it's critical to know that his father, coming out of Nigeria, traversing into the UK, leading Black Power movements in the UK, and then bringing that effort forward into the 48 contiguous, and the influence it had and the influences of the Caribbean are highlighted in here. And I just wanted to share a piece, just to give a little idea. Somebody's phone is about to go. Around justice, in particular. Leaving Nigeria for the US, my father accepted an invitation to participate in the internationally renowned Iowa Writers' Workshop, earning an MFA degree from that program in 1978, based on his thesis, Author's Diary, Impressions of Three Worlds. Do you see where we're speaking? So the Caribbean, again, becomes at the center of this conversation. So that's why you can speak of Amy Jacks Garvey, a grounding mother, a grandmother of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, yeah? You can speak of Emile Cabral, his work in Africa, right? And then speak of Maurice Bishop and that very revolutionary conscious work, regardless of how his life was ended so swiftly, yeah? I think it's really important. I think I've done enough intro. I'd like us to welcome very warmly our plenary. I know you're ready. Obi Egbuna II.
Okay. Yeah, because I have the microphone in the ear. So, okay. And here's the clicker. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to say that on behalf of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, whether I was saying it in the 7 colonial languages imposed on the masses of our people, or the 5,000 languages that our ancestors have produced since the beginning of time, none of them could capture. Okay. It's all right. This will be edited, so it's all good. So take this off. Okay. Okay. Greetings to everybody. On behalf of greetings. Okay. I'd like to thank Dr. Chinzera and the rest of the Caribbean Studies Association for the invitation. I'm so humbled by it. As I was saying, I couldn't express the gratitude if I chose to use the 5,000 languages that our ancestors have created since the beginning of time, or the 7 languages that have been brutally imposed on our people. But I'll just try my best by saying I am humbled, I am honored. I sincerely hope that the presentation that we give today meets your expectations. So I'm here on behalf of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, Cuba being in the Caribbean, the Spanish-speaking part of the Caribbean, the driving force and revolution in the Western Hemisphere today, who we make no apologies for defending and standing firmly behind. So I'm in that organization because if you know anything about Zimbabwe's history, they have a 97% literacy rate, the highest on the African continent, and that is because in 1986, Comandante Fidel Castro made an arrangement for 3,000 Zimbabwean teachers between 1986 and 1996 to train in Cuba, 3,000 Zimbabwean teachers, and they became the backbone of the educational system. What we call the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of Cuban solidarity, you usually just see Madiba Nelson Mandela standing next to Fidel Castro receiving the Jose Marti Award.
Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso is the first African leader to get it in 1984. Robert Mugabe, the late president of Zimbabwe, got it in 1985. Then Mandela in 1990. Then Thabo Mbeki, just to set the record straight. So the ties between Zimbabwe, you hear about Cuba's efforts on the guerrilla front in Angola. Nobody talks about the role they played in elevating the educational standard in Zimbabwe. So there's a connection there. So today we're dedicating what we're about to share to Amy Jean Garvey out of the Caribbean, no question. This is the 50th anniversary of her passing. Maurice Bishop, assassinated on October 19, 1983 by the Reagan administration under a false report that Grenada, at the time that had 88,000 people, was stashing missiles in their airport aimed at the United States that had 233 million people. That was just Reagan being punch drunk from the days when he was a spy for J. Edgar Hoover in Hollywood, and then as the governor of California made destroying the Black Panther Party for self-defense priority number one. So that's the organization that I represent. And some of you may say, this is a Caribbean Studies Association. Why the dedication to Amilcar Cabral? Because of the staple of agriculture and the role of the development in the Caribbean, we have to recognize Amilcar Cabral because he taught the Africans in Guinea-Bissau equally as important as shedding your blood to liberate your soil, cultivating and developing the soil is also a priority. Yes, sir. So this is why we're dedicating this to them today. We go back to Henry Sylvester Williams. He founded the African Association in 1897. You see the objective there, to promote and protect the interests of all subjects claiming African descent, wholly or in part, in British colonies. And you know he organized the first Pan-African Conference in 1900, which paved the way for the most important gathering of Africans in the 20th century, the Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945. So if you're going to have a Caribbean studies, build institutions, build vehicles, he has to be mentioned and celebrated. And the one thing we must not do is be intimidated of these fighters, because history imposes the challenge on us to expand on their work. You will not expand on their work if you're intimidated by them. Dr. Du Bois, everyone knows his contributions. But he was once asked, did he have an intellectual equal in the space that he lived? And he said, no man living has revealed so many important facts about the African. They said Negro. I don't say that, but you get the point. As Rogers. He's talking about J.A. Rogers, Joel Augustus Rogers. Many of you know him from writing From Superman to Man. When the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was in jail for false charges of espionage, the only one he allowed to interview him was J.A. Rogers. And J.A. Rogers was the only African reporter out of the United States to cover Haile Selassie's coronation. You cannot talk about the Caribbean and not talk about J.A. Rogers. There would be no John Henry Clark if it wasn't for J.A. Rogers and many of the others who are considered the face of our efforts scholastically. This is a letter that J.A. Rogers wrote to Dr. Du Bois, telling him that based on his research, Scotland Yard did not have an intelligence file on him, at least in 1925. Because we know by 1953, when Du Bois was charged with being responsible for the circulation of the Stockholm Peace Appeal, where 500 million people opposed nuclear warfare, his passport was taken from him at the tender age of 83 for 8 years. Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, these are his words about his best friend, George Padmore, one of the best organizers out of the Caribbean. He said, one day, the whole of Africa will surely be free and united, and when its final tale is told, the significance of George Padmore's work will be released. Then and only then. And I feel that this is important because this same Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah tells us our history is too often written by its ruling class, making it simple, too often by opportunists, too often by liars, too often by cowards, and that paves the way for outsiders, outside our experience, outside our culture, to rape our culture the way our land has been raped. That's right. However, though, we know Taylor Branch can't have the last word on Martin Luther King, and Clint Eastwood can't have the last word on Charlie Parker. Many people, too, also, when we come to deal with we treat the 1960s like Christians treat the Garden of Eden. So we deliberately, when we deal with the modern part of the African experience, focus on things before the 60s. That's of paramount importance. So many people know that Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is arguably the most impactful book written in the 1970s. But George Padmore wrote How Britain Ruled Africa in 1936. So the framework, the narrative, the guide comes from the work of George Padmore. We will never stop thanking the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey because out of all the things he did, many people, it's hardly discussed. And it's important now because in the 48 contiguous, as Dr. Jansira likes to say, they're reducing Tuskegee to the Tuskegee Airmen. Booker T. Washington is becoming a footnote. And the Honorable Marcus, and he's criticized in certain circles for being conservative. But somewhere and up from slavery, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, sitting in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica, read it, got inspired, started corresponding with him, made his way to the 48 contiguous, and that's how the UNIA was built. Osajeko Dr. Kwame Nkrumah tells you in his own words, when I think of all the literature I study, and this is at Lincoln University, philosophy student, he's studying Dostoevsky, Marx, Kierkegaard, Socrates, Aristotle. But he says the book that did more than any other to fire my enthusiasm was The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, written in 1923. So Africa's first nation to be free from settler colonialism, he put the ideas of Garvey into practice. And there's nothing more beautiful than watching an idea that's been articulated, executed. Because we know the importance of vision, the difference between vision and program. And if you're talking about, and sometimes in gatherings like this, many come before you, vision, 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 and no program. They might as well have saved that for optometrist conference. Taking it further, Ho Chi Minh, when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee went to see him, the first organization in the United States to come out against the Vietnam War, he told them, passing through Harlem, hearing the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey talking about Africa, he said, I got to love Vietnam like that. And the way the Vietnamese dismantled the French made it the most vicious assault on them to defeat them since the Haitian Revolution. Algeria got its independence. The Congo got its independence. Mali got its independence because of what Vietnam did, following the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's vision and program. Many don't know that Dr. Martin Luther King finished Where Do We Go From Here in Jamaica. And the very first thing he did before he got some oxtail, before he got some goat, he said, I got to go to the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's grave to put flowers as a sign of respect. So it is no coincidence that the organization that carried out the Montgomery bus boycott was the Montgomery Improvement Association. Listen to the name. Arturo Schomburg, showing up in New York, looking the way he did, with a Spanish accent, with a German last name. Built the most important research center we have in the United States. And when he showed up in Harlem, the first organization he started was the Committee for the Independence of Puerto Rico and Cuba. Paul Robeson, and some of you, I don't believe in suicide, so how I'm going to get through this presentation and not deal with women? Not in here. This is Paul Robeson in his own words talking about Claudia Jones. It was a great privilege to have known Claudia Jones. She was a courageous leader of the Communist Party of the United States and active in the struggle. Claudia Jones deported from the United States in 1955. So when we teach our young people about 1955, we don't just deal with Emmett Till. We don't just deal with Rosa Parks. We don't deal with Claudette Colvin exclusively. We make sure that Claudia Jones is mentioned, and we also make sure that Mbalia Kamara is mentioned, who led the revolution in Guinea, led the women, and she was assassinated by a chief who was working with the French in Guinea. We are against the amputated narrative that wants to cut us off everywhere from each other. And they said it was about, because if you weren't born in the United States, you couldn't join the Communist Party. Amy Ashwood Garvey, the first wife, founded the Nigerian People's Union, produced a play called Brown Sugar, which introduced people to the music of Fats Waller, and was central in organizing the Fifth Pan-African Congress. Why is that important? Because Du Bois was the lead organizer 5 years after the death of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So that means, as far as we're concerned, that hatchet was buried in 1945. So why are people still running around here talking about the divide? I'm on Garvey's side, I'm Du Bois' side. How immature you sound. Amy Jaar Garvey, and this is important because Kwame Ture and Mukasa Dada did not start the Black Power concept. They reignited it. Frederick Douglass first. Then Richard Wright in 1954, writing a book dedicated to Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Amy Jacques Garvey wrote a book in 1963, Black Power in America, The Power of the Human Spirit. The most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey never set foot in Africa, but she did as a guest of Nnamdi Azikiwe, who went to Lincoln University before Osage for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and encouraged him to go and gave him a letter of recommendation. 3 years before Dr. Du Bois's appeal to the United Nations, she writes a memorandum correlative, Africa, West Indies, and the Americas, and that led to the first African Freedom Charter at the United Nations. So we've been using the platform at the United Nations for a long time, starting in 1923, when as this year is the 100th anniversary of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's appeal to white America. And that's why when we want to collectively have one voice, we don't do petitions, we do appeals. We know our political culture. Hazel Scott, remember her? Pierre, and look, they said, you the reason that Adam Clayton Powell has this attitude that he has, because he got you behind him. She said, who walked behind any man to freedom? I'll walk in front of him if he can't keep up. I got no problem with that. They took her before the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and when she was in France, she marched on the U.S. Embassy with James Baldwin to show solidarity with the March on Washington in D.C. And they did it in Ghana too. At the age of 82, Catherine Dunham, who taught more Africans throughout this hemisphere about the Caribbean with feet. At 82, she went on a hunger strike protesting U.S. policy on Haiti. Shirley Chisholm redefined how we look at elected officials. And Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth, was compulsory for the Black Panther Party for self-defense and laid the foundation for an organization that still exists today called the Association of Black Psychologists. So in closing, though, because when we come here to something like this, of course we're expected to give some narrative, but with an organizational background, we have to talk about practical things. We mentioned Cuba earlier. Every professor in here, every teacher in here, every administrator in here, here's your charge. Go back to your campuses, go back to your institutions, develop an exchange program with Cuba. How can you not, if you haven't done it already? Zimbabwe has a 97% literacy rate, but they're going to try to talk to you about politics thinking you're going to take their lead. But use that as an opportunity to connect with all of Southern Africa, because a narrative has been imposed on us about Southern Africa, but it's reduced to the autobiography of Nelson Mandela and his wife, Winnie Mandela. There are more Nelson Mandela movies than Planet of the Apes, Batman, and Superman movies. No problem with him, but you see the point? So Namibia, and listen to this. This is Southern Africa. Angola gets its independence in 74. Mozambique, 75. Zimbabwe, 80. Namibia, 90. What's called South Africa, 1994. There are 14 nations in Southern Africa waiting to develop relationships with you. I say to you on behalf of the Eritrean ambassador to the United States, who I just was with last week, they're the only nation right now in Africa that have free education and free health care, and they have a peace accord with Ethiopia. And if you know about 1 million Africans dying in Nigeria during the Igbo-Biafran conflict, what happened in Rwanda with the Hutsis and the Tutsis, Rwanda is English-speaking, Eritrea is English-speaking, and the hip-hop artists that many of your children or grandchildren or nephews and nieces, they're wearing a shirt right now, his name is Ermias Eshadom, but they call him Nipsey Hussle. And the reason he left the Rolling 60 Crips is because his father sent him to Eritrea, and they took him and they taught him about their revolution. You've got to develop relationships with Eritrea, exchange programs, bringing it back to the Caribbean. 13 years ago, an African, as he called himself, named Comandante Hugo Chavez. Didn't he say, I'm African, look at my hair, look at my nose, look at my lips. And right now, Venezuela has led a movement that says, we're not Afro-Caribbean, we're not Afro-Latino, we're African descendants. Everybody here must connect with Venezuela now. And lastly, I'm about to wrap it up, no doubt about it. So look, and on the political front of things, Assata Shakur turned 75 years old last year. She and many people, we are, of course, in the name of Maurice Bishop, because he was assassinated because of his relationship with Cuba. This is what we say. There are many people who, when they focus on different parts of our history, you know it, oh, if I was there in the South in the 1960s and they would have put their hands on me, oh, if I was there when they shot at Malcolm, you have a chance to do something in the space and time you occupy. Assata Shakur is on Homeland Security's terrorist list as the #1 terrorist in the world. Let's organize to get her off it. And the $2 million bounty on her head, what is that? And this is the same government that tried to assassinate Comandante Fidel Castro 635 times. You understand? And lastly, Cuba should come off their terrorist list, because Cuba has never attempted to impersonate them, only defend the oppressed. And many of you are from nations that have the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade physically in your nations, and convincing your children to be doctors and not leave to contribute to the brain drain. So that's the presentation. If we got time for Q&A, if we don't, however, as she said earlier, my father's book is available. There are 17 copies, and we'll sign them for you, whatever you want to do. But most importantly, everything I mentioned, and the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company, as she said, we've done we've had 30 plays written, 40 performances in 13 years. Our plays have been in the Congo. We did a play there with children there called 1925 about the childhood of Lumumba, the childhood of Frantz Fanon, the childhood of Brother Malcolm, all born in 1925. And Medgar Evers and Lumumba were born the same day. We just did a play about Paul Robeson and Maurice Bishop. Children performed in 14 languages. You heard Mende, which we speak in Sierra Leone, Lingala, which we speak in the Congo, Shona, which we speak in Zimbabwe, Igbo, which we speak in Nigeria. But in closing, because we speak the language of resistance. If you don't speak the language of resistance, if you're conforming and capitulating to our former colonizers, whether you do it in Portuguese, whether you do it in German, whether you do it in Arabic, whether you do it in English, whether you do it in Shona, whether you do it in Mende, you are compromising the integrity of Africans yet to be born. So in the African fighting spirit that was responsible for this conference coming into existence, for us being here with you, we thank you.
Thank you. Fire starter. Fire starter. I guess that burned up some energy in lunch. Woo! How you feeling? You feeling okay? You feeling good? With that in mind, I'd like to know if there are any burning, right, we done hear fire burn twice. It's like not even fire burn. You'll notice here, it's fireman! Like F-I-Y-A-H-B-U-N, no R. We're good, we're good. We would like to entertain, we have a limited amount of time. We've got to go to our next session. But are there any burning questions? We're able to take a few.
I just just want to add, people often forget Africans in Panama and Costa Rica. And we tend to forget that there's a whole Caribbean experience in Panama from the building of the Panama Canal. And Marcus Garvey spent 12 years in Panama organizing. My grandmother, my aunt were all Garveyites. My great-grandmother died at 107, and they were all Garveyites. But somehow or the other, people have to start thinking about Africans in Panama and in Costa Rica and in Colombia. They're free Palenque states. Before Haiti's successful revolution, there were the Palenques, and the Palenques in Panama and Colombia still exist today.
Any question before we go to any other comment? Any other burning question? All right. Okay. Got it.
Okay, so the burning question is, Amy Jace Garvey and Amy Garwood, maybe Amy Garwood, no, together, they led a charge for Garvey to forgive his oppressor, right? Du Bois. So can you just give us the evidence that those two women did want him and push to bear the hatchet?
I think the best example of that is the fact that she worked under his court, because the Fifth Pan-African Congress, the most impactful one, the fact that she worked with him and worked under his coordination, that spoke volumes. I want to thank you for what you brought up. Our time was limited. In 1999, I went to Panama. And the reason that I went to Panama, the organization I was in at the time, the Pan-African Student Youth Movement, we had a military project. So we went and we met with the people there who had exposed the fact that the Agent Orange that was not used on the Vietnamese people was stashed in Panama, and it polluted the river there. So when you see someone like Al Gore being imposed as the face of environmentalism, we realize how hilarious that is, and insulting at the same time. So we went there to document and chronicle that information. So we spent time in Panama City, and one of the most beautiful drives I've ever took in my life is from Panama City to Colón. And so we were there and we did that, and we still want to make sure that work is out, because many people have forgotten about how imperialism has contaminated the hemisphere with their military bases. And Panama is one of the biggest agents in the United States being used to sabotage Cuban solidarity efforts went to Balboa High School, where the children of U.S. soldiers could go because the people that were born in Panama could not go. So thank you so much for reminding us to raise that. So we got a track record of work in Panama, too. It's only that we were condensed. And I'm glad she brought that up, because wherever you're teaching Caribbean studies at, please do this. In 1988, I took a class called Black Politics at the University of the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., and the professor, and so everybody was doing papers on Jesse Jackson's second quest for the presidency, where he gave a speech about why the Panama Canal Zone must be closed, written by Jack Odell. Anyway, he says, she says, why are you doing a paper on Maurice Bishop? I said, oh, this is the 5th anniversary of his passing. He was 39 years old when he was assassinated, just like Malcolm and Martin were. So I feel a connection to him. And she says, well, this is a Black American. We focus on the Black American experience. I said, Grenada's in the America. We don't accept the Democrat and Republicans' definition of America. And it is so white supremacist that if Hitler and Mussolini were alive today, they would say, damn, why did not think of that? So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Desmond. Let's give another resounding round of applause to O.B. Egbuna II. And make sure, if you'd like a copy of Destroy This Temple with an introduction by him from the piece that was done in 1971 by his father, please feel free to do so. I know people are just taking from my book. We'll deal with that later. Now we're moving forward into our next set of concurrent sessions. Let me make sure I put my little cheat notes together. We did put, give me 1 second, sis. Give me 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. we're going to make sure the persons are aware. The next session is to end at 3. We have a little leeway we've been able to use. Now I know exactly why my program chair left 30 minutes between each session. So we can I recognize, I have to acknowledge, I know, because I was like, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, but you were like, no, 30 minutes. No, I'm going to say it the way that you would say it. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Right, so I just want to thank everyone for their engagement. Did you enjoy the presentation? Yes. All right, and we're going to move now into, there'll be a different session in here. There'll be a continuation of sessions in the cafeteria area. There'll be another set of sessions inside of the small conference room right here, and then we will continue over in the RT Park, and there are 3 different concurrent sessions over there. If you have any questions, please go to the secretariat. You can, okay, they'll have to do that in the lobby because we need to get the area clear. Thank you very much.